In this module, I'm going to go into more depth on a use case using BizFlow as a case management application, and also talk a little bit about behind the scenes of how the system or the process is actually designed and built. Up to this point, I've showed you two very simple processes in BizFlow, and in both cases, they're very human-centric in nature, meaning really just people are involved in the process, and we're moving electronic forms and attached documentation from one individual or group to another. More often than not, BizFlow is also integrated to other business systems, where we're either pulling information from those systems or updating information in those existing business systems. The process I want to show you now, first again, I will show you the flow diagram. And you can see that this is a much more sophisticated process. This is actually a case management type of application. What we're doing is we're handling different complaint and appeal cases in this particular application, where an individual is first creating the case, and then based on information that they enter into that case, it's going to determine what path or branch to take in this process. For example, if it were a grievance case, it's going to take the grievance path. If it were a member appeal case, it's going to take the appeal path. And then what we can see is that in this process, we're also performing what we consider system activities. So unlike the human activity where a person is performing that task, we have a SQL activity that's updating a database, we have an agent activity that's generating a letter, and we have sub-processes or sub-flows, where when we drill into that activity, we see that there's many, many more activities that lie beneath it. So in this particular case, when it's an appeal case, it goes through a very, very sophisticated workflow process. In addition to the process being more sophisticated and incorporating system activities within the flow, we're also aggregating data and documents from multiple sources when we implement case-oriented types of applications. You can see here, again, in this case we have a far, far more sophisticated form, and this has incorporated features such as, based on certain selections that I make, additional fields will be hidden or displayed. If I select agency, I then have the ability to select which agency. If I select member for my case type, then I'm going to be able to select from only member categories when I go to categorize this case. If I were to select provider, then I would be able to only select provider types of categories. And so we can build intelligence and dependencies into the fields that the user selects. We're also tying this particular form into two other systems. We have an enrollment system, and so we want to get member data, and we don't want to have to rekey that data. In this case, I can start to type a name or a portion of a name and click the search, and that's going to bring back any relevant records, and then I can select that record and pre-populate the fields based on that selection. So this is integrating to an enrollment Oracle database. And just like the other applications I showed you, this system would also then have some type of inbox for the team that's working on these particular cases, and they would be able to see the various actions. And you can also see here that BizFlow can be customized then to use the form data as part of the user interface or user experience. So I've been able to change my inbox and relabel that to my cases, and I've been able to use or add columns into my work list that are relevant to this particular process and application. So these are forms that are fields that are in my form, and I can use them to display the list of work, to be able to sort work based on that information, and so on. So these applications can be very tailored, again, to meet the needs of the particular process or department that's working on that work. And I have my monitor, of course, in the same way that I was able to monitor my time off request, I can monitor and track these cases. And this then lets me see what the status of these various cases are and what the current resolution status is and so on. And as I had mentioned earlier, you can have different menus. Right now I am just a staff member, and so I have a main menu and I have cases by queues. And that allows me to then look at the work instead of into a consolidated work list. I can look at only appeals or only grievances or only non-par provider appeals in individual work queues. You may separate work by the way that individuals work. Certain groups only act upon certain cases, and this is a way for you to organize that work or those inboxes. If I were to log in as a manager, an A&G manager in this case, as a manager, I now have access to not only the work area, but I also have the administrative functions of BizFlow that I can access. And you can see that the menu that I have is the A&G Manager menu. I can also go to the other two menus that were available to my staff, but I now have this additional menu or additional view. And that allows me then to access things like reports, or I can create additional new reports. I have the ability to monitor work in progress, and in doing so I can also forward work or reassign work or escalate cases and perform the types of functions that you would expect a business manager to perform. So clearly I think you can see that BizFlow can really be applied to a lot of different types of processes. You can take things that are very paper-driven today and convert them into electronic, online types of applications, or you can augment existing business systems. I want to take a moment now to show you the Process Design Studio and a little bit about how you build or implement one of these types of processes. Of course, we're going to spend a lot more time on this in later modules, but I really just want to touch upon it here. One of the key components or tools of BizFlow that we're going to spend a fair amount of time working with is the BizFlow Process Studio. And this studio, as I mentioned earlier, is a desktop tool. It gets installed on your desktop. And when you launch this particular tool, within it is the BizFlow Process Modeler. And this is where we design and implement or build our processes. What you see here is the BPMN palette, and I'll talk more about that again later. This palette lets us drag activities or activity types from the palette into our process canvas. And if I wanted to build a simple two-step process, like we saw in our time off request, I would have a starting point and ending point. I would have two human or normal activities where we expect someone to perform some task, and I would link those activities together, and then I could create a route back path in my process. And as I also described earlier, when you double click on an activity, this is where you set up various attributes of that activity. For example, who is going to participate in this process? What type of applications or forms might be linked to this step in the process? What type of deadlines and alerts might occur? So you can see that this is how we begin to design and implement a BizFlow process. Looking at a somewhat more complex process, this is the sub-process to the case management system that I just showed you. You can see that these processes can get far more complex. And in this process, we have many decision points, for examples, or gateways. And when we reach those gateways in a process, BizFlow evaluates various information. In this case, we're evaluating a field in the form called priority, and if that priority has been expedited, if the person selected expedited, and another field in the form, which is the category, if they selected appeal, then we're going to branch down this particular path in the process. And as you can see, if I select other paths, then we'll get different rules for our routing and branching. And as you can see, of course, that while this is a very sophisticated process, we're still really using drag and drop and point and click techniques to design the flow and the rules that govern this particular flow. And then, of course, once I have the model completed, BizFlow allows us to create forms, and we can store those forms on the server, and then we can link those forms to the various activities where we expect someone to perform some type of input to that form or review of that form. And you can see I can take this form and I can drag it and drop it over this activity, and then it's going to link this form to this step in the flow. And we're of course going to get more into this again as we go through the rest of our course. One of the key reasons I wanted to spend just a few moments on understanding how you design a traditional BizFlow process. In the next module, I'm going to talk about quick process, and I wanted to make sure that we can make the distinction between a quick process in BizFlow and a more traditional process like we're seeing here. The last thing I want to really cover in this module is the user experience and how easy it is to use BizFlow's BizCoves to create custom menus and views to tailor applications to your end user community. BizFlow's menus or work areas, as we've been looking at them, are comprised of what we call BizCoves. And BizCoves are really these individual blocks of functionality. So in this particular view, which is a BizCove view, I have two BizCoves. I have the Welcome BizCove, and I have this new Start New or Initiation BizCove. In the My Work BizCove view, I have this Inbox BizCove, and I have My Cases, which is a work list BizCove. So you can create these individual blocks of functionality and then incorporate them together into views and tie those views to menus, and that's how we create these user experiences in the application. And if you recall, in the first demonstration I showed you, there was the standard out-of-the-box BizFlow menu and or workspace, so you can use it out of the box as it is, or you can custom create these views based on the various applications you're implementing. And it's really simple to modify or create these various BizCoves. If you have the right rights, in this case I have business administrative rights, I can come in and I can modify this particular BizCove, and the same technique would be used to create a new one. So you can see that this shows the name as My Cases. If I wanted to change this to My To-Do List, I could simply type in My To-Do List. And this wizard walks you through the various attributes of this particular block of functionality. So this describes how many items would be displayed in the list, how frequently that list is going to refresh as new work comes in to the work list. This allows you to set up various filters, and I'm not going to go into details about that right now. This allows you to determine what functional options are displayed on that work list, in this case open and export the list to Excel, but you can see there's many other options that I could choose to add to this particular work list. And then it shows what columns are being displayed on the work list. So you can easily relabel or change them or move them out or move them in. And then you can determine if people can search on them and sort them and so on. So it's very, very easy to set up these work lists, and then you can preview it and whatever change you make would then be applied. So just to summarize what we've looked at, I would classify what I've just described to you as traditional business process management and traditional business process management applications, meaning that generally you go through some type of process or methodology, I should say, to define the workflow, to model the workflow, to build out the applications, and then ultimately to publish and allow your end user community to interact with these applications. Traditional BizFlow applications support human to human type of workflow, system to human workflow, and case management applications. These are some of the things that I've described and shown to you. Very simple to very complex types of processing, rules and decision-driven routing. Again, I showed you where there's various diamond points in the process where you're making, or the process is making, decisions about which way to route work based on characteristics of the application itself and the data that's being captured. And in traditional BizFlow applications, you can do both serial and or parallel types of processing.